Allie Shaw. She's a fierce survivor who has reinvented herself multiple times after devastating loss. She's a cancer survivor who became an opera singer, a divorced single mom of two who found the love of her life. She married and became mom to a blended family of 7 amazing children. Allie is an author, an entrepreneur, a core value ambassador, and a motivational speaker. She and her husband own a 17-store Domino's franchise. Did you bring samples? No? Okay. Employing over 300 people. She and her husband, Kevin, who is here today, are passionate about giving back to children and families in need and have financially supported St. Jude's Children's Hospital for decades. Their commitment to service and a Coats for Kids campaign led to Kevin receiving a Paul Harris Award in 2012. Allie is the author of the narrative nonfiction book, Chasing Tigers in the Dark, Life Lessons of a Fierce Survivor. Her purpose is deeply rooted in the intersection of trauma recovery and mental health awareness and how each inform our personal development and professional success. Allie's brand is characterized by vulnerability, authenticity, and an abiding zeal for justice. Finally, Allie dedicates this talk to her father, who recently passed away and who was a Rotary Club member. I welcome Allie Shaw.
Good afternoon. It is certainly an honor to be here. My goodness, the work that you all are doing for children and families in need is inspiring, and the work that you're doing is so needed in this world. So thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Today, I want to begin a conversation that explores the intersection of trauma recovery and mental health awareness, and how each affect personal development and professional success. Unmanaged trauma and how it affects our mental health, specifically anxiety and depression, can be our biggest roadblock when considering our capacity to succeed, because trauma distracts us from what is required to be our very best. Additionally, when we are triggered by unresolved trauma, we have no control over how we show up in the world, and that can drive the perpetual experience of fear. My book, Chasing Tigers in the Dark, is a metaphor for the fear that attempts to stunt our productivity and divert us from living abundantly. When we are living in a space of trauma-induced fear, our filter with which we view the world is distorted, because typically the first thing we see is the thing we want to forget. As we begin our time together today, allow me to share a few statistics about trauma and mental health. Over 70% of the population will face trauma. Over 60% of the population will face childhood trauma. Over 50% of women and 1 in 3 men will face sexual violence. Finally, 97% of inmates have experienced trauma before they were incarcerated. It should come as no surprise that over 50% of the population struggles with their mental health. Today, I want to begin to demystify the stigma around the discussion of mental health struggles and provide a roadmap for healing with my TIGER acronym. But first, do I have any NFL fans in the room? All right, season's around the corner. If you love football, you have probably seen ESPN's Monday Night Countdown a time or two. During that show, there is a Come On Man segment that reviews less than desirable plays from the previous week's games. So for those who are not familiar, each flawed play is examined, and the player or coach who dropped the ball, pun intended, is addressed by name, is publicly shamed, followed by the phrase, "Come on, man." Do you guys know what I'm talking about? All right, perfect. This come on, man analogy always makes me think about the unfavorable plays that life throws our way that can only be described as curveballs. I have been thrown a steady flow of curveball situations, but the life lessons that accompanied them allowed me to live into my passion and purpose of helping others as a cognitive empath. Understanding another person's struggle fundamentally can be a great source of healing. And I pray the story I'm about to share today will provide hope and resources to each of you. I believe all of us in this room have a story that might be difficult to face and seems impossible to share. Unfortunately, I have a book of traumatic stories. My book of complex trauma presents with multiple events in short frames of time. I call them seasons of adversity. At the end of each season, all I could think was, come on, man, and wonder what I was supposed to be learning from all of the hardship. I have always been an eternal optimist, able to see the silver lining on the darkest day. But 2023 has challenged every droplet of my glass half full persona. Allow me to share that story and the lesson. This story begins on Valentine's Day, 2023, actually the morning after. I was scrolling Facebook and was stunned to learn that an old friend and neighbor of mine had lost her battle with cancer on Valentine's Day. She was only 57. I recalled so many fond memories of our impromptu dinners with our husbands and our children. I immediately texted my ex-husband, Glenn, to tell him about Debbie's passing. And then I went about my morning caring for my son who had a cold and my daughter who was participating in senior skip day. A couple of hours later, I received a call that changed our lives. Glenn's sister and brother conference called to tell me he had tragically passed away the night before from a massive heart attack. Glenn was only 51 years old. My own heart broke sharing the news that their dad's sudden passing with my beloved son and daughter. That was the worst day of my entire life. The day that my children became complex trauma survivors during a time when it should have been the happiest of their life. The irony of Glenn's deadly heart attack on Valentine's Day, the heart holiday, seemed like a sick joke without a punchline. We could not begin the grieving process because our season of adversity continued. When our 25-year-old daughter, who lives in Illinois, called with a possible cancer diagnosis. She was going to need surgery and our support. A couple of weeks after that, we found out that my dad broke his femur in a fall. The pathology report showed cancer had returned and metastasized in his bones, lymph nodes, and organs, and he was terminal. We had just celebrated Dad's remission with a trip to Vegas 1 week before Glenn's passing. A trip where my hero, Dr. Daddy, who was silently enduring stage 4 cancer, saved a woman's life on that plane that took us home. Dad and Mom lived 6 hours away from our home. I could not believe that I was being presented with an impossible decision to go care for my dad in his final days or care for the emotional needs of my grieving children. Thankfully, I have an amazing husband, and we were able to divide and conquer the task of caring for my parents and supporting the children while taking turns. Tragically, my dad lost his battle with cancer and passed away while I held his hand on April 29th. He was my best friend, the voice of reason in my head, and he saved my life during my own battle with cancer. I was in shock. I could not believe he was gone and that I was grieving my dad while my children were grieving their dad and their granddad. Our new reality seemed like our worst nightmare, and I felt myself slipping into a deep depression characterized by constant insomnia. Ever my faithful rock, my husband planned a wellness retreat for our 10-year wedding anniversary, which happened to fall 3 weeks after my dad's passing. We had just hosted my mom for 2 weeks and celebrated my daughter's graduation from high school. Our other daughter's scare turned out not to be cancer, and she was able to push the surgery to the summer. Everyone was in a great place and grieving in a healthy manner thanks to a wonderful therapist. My sister insisted that we go on our anniversary trip and attempt to take a break. She was planning to stay with my mom to cushion her loneliness, as she had been with my dad for 60 years. Our oldest daughter and son-in-law were looking after my grieving children, so we decided to go. My husband and I arrived in Arizona at Castle Hot Springs and the magical oasis of ultimate relaxation. The plan was to adopt some healthy mindfulness and self-care habits to maneuver our current experience of trauma-induced mental health struggles. In the first couple of hours, we soaked in the hot springs, enjoyed a delicious lunch, and attended a private breathwork seminar to manage anxiety. We returned to our bungalow and a ringing phone. My sister called. There was a medical emergency. My mom had just experienced a near-deadly seizure, was unconscious, and was being taken to the hospital in an ambulance. I could not feel my hands. A panic attack was on the horizon, and my spirit was on the verge of breaking. It took more than 24 hours to get back to my mom in the trauma hospital in Myrtle Beach, where she was diagnosed with having a stroke. I looked out the window of the plane that carried us back to more misfortune, and all I could think was, say it with me, come on, man. I'm thankful for the silver lining. My mom is okay and has completely recovered with no lasting damage. The season of grieving for my entire family has brought us closer together. The surgery in Chicago was a success, and our daughter is healed. My marriage has never been stronger, and my husband has stepped up for my children in countless inspiring ways. Finally, my son and daughter are thriving, and I could not be more proud of them. There were many lessons, but the biggest one was the realization to live in a space of no regret relationships. I learned to say what I needed to say, make plans today, for tomorrow is never promised. I also learned that forgiveness should be granted and spoken in the moment it occurs, as the opportunity may pass you by. The directive that I want to pass along today is that trauma is much easier to navigate if we're already living in a neutral position. Allow me to explain. The title of this talk is, I Caught the Tiger, Now What? And as I mentioned before, the tiger represents fear. But in order to catch the tiger, I had to become the tiger, to eliminate the fear that accompanied my chronic adversity. After my come on man moments, I adopted a hashtag of stay fierce as a new courageous mantra for my life. Stay fierce represents equal parts bravery and passion. And that fresh perspective also influenced the creation of my TIGER acronym. The TIGER acronym includes 5 suggestions for living your best life before, after, or during trauma, with a goal to get you back to neutral before the next storm of life ensues. The first letter, T, of the TIGER acronym is trust your intuition as it relates to safety and decision-making, but also what you are passionate about in life. Passion is what gets us out of bed in the morning, and it is the flame that fuels my persistent positivity. I have had many opportunities to trust my intuition after battling a very aggressive cancer, surviving 2 predatory attacks, and the complicated demise of my first marriage. But trusting your intuition begins at the foundation of who we are, not just when we experience trauma. The practice of listening to our inner monologue instead of making decisions blindly can create an infrastructure for success and perhaps even better protect us from future trauma. I did not listen to my inner voice when choosing my first career as an opera singer, for example. I told myself it was what I was supposed to do after earning 2 college degrees. It should have been so obvious how miserable I was. As a classical singer, I had to be so disciplined with my lifestyle, restricting myself from dairy, caffeine, and alcohol. Can you imagine a life with no ice cream, coffee, or wine? Come on, man. Last one, I promise. In all seriousness, it was more than that. The pressure to be perfect, to maintain all 3 octaves of my vocal range, was stimulating my once dormant anxiety and fracturing my once thriving passion for music. I was convinced that I needed to be a singer because that was my God-given gift. It was not until I moved back to my childhood home after divorce that I considered making a change. As you can imagine, moving to a small rural town with my 2 preschoolers in tow did not afford me the opportunities to continue as an opera singer. I had to cast a wide net. And what I realized during the job search process is that many of us will have more than one career in life for a variety of reasons. My passion and purpose have always been firmly rooted in helping others. And I quickly discovered that there are much more impactful ways I can help people aside from singing. I found better ways to use the voice I was given by being an advocate for trauma recovery and mental health awareness. It began as a one-on-one passion project that has evolved into my preferred career as an author and motivational speaker. The discovery of that fundamental passion of helping others was confirmed when I took the 16 personality and Enneagram tests. You know it. Both personality tests provided useful information with data that is comprehensive for all areas of your life. It tells you strengths and weaknesses, romantic relationship and friendship guidance, career, place, and workplace preferences, parenting strategies, and so much more. Understanding the foundation of what drives my passion and purpose was the first step of creating my infrastructure for success. But creating that plan also came with a cost, which brings us to letter I of the TIGER acronym. Invest in yourself. Developing my strategy for success also required a deep dive into the distractions that were preventing the focus I needed to succeed. Yes, I am talking about therapy, but not just any therapy. I discovered EMDR in 2022, which is an absolute godsend to individuals living with PTSD across all generations and diverse traumatic experiences. EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. It is a non-invasive approach to resolving one trauma at a time by healing the brain with bilateral eye movements. With EMDR, I was able to transform and resolve all of my complex trauma, and now I am no longer triggered by past memories. The absence of triggers allowed me to take my control back and relinquished my fears. EMDR has an 80% success rate for individuals suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder and is especially useful for veterans. I believe the 20% gap is directly related to each individual carefully choosing a therapist they can trust. I am also an advocate for EMDR because I heard the stories of how my paternal grandfather, Georges Henri, pictured here, suffered with PTSD following his service in World War II. After returning from war, my grandfather was employed at the Veterans Administration in Salem, Virginia, while my grandmother raised 3 sons. 4 months after my youngest uncle was born, my grandfather disappeared for 3 weeks. He was the subject of multiple newspaper articles when he was found in Washington, D.C. He had been experiencing blackouts and randomly boarded a train. An off-duty police officer discovered him at a Washington Senators baseball game after my sassy redheaded grandmother filed a warrant for his arrest. Yeah, she was a spunky thing. Mental health was certainly not being discussed at that time, and his traumatic war experiences, accompanied by several post-war medical issues, likely triggered a breakdown that presented as blackouts. In World War II, only 10% of veterans reported having PTSD symptoms, and in 2023, only 7%. Upon further research, I discovered that 63% of veterans fear seeking help for PTSD, stating the belief that it will affect their military and/or civilian careers. I have witnessed the devastating culture of sweeping PTSD under the rug. I have seen the catalyst of unmanaged trauma spark catastrophic health implications, broken marriages, suicidal thoughts, and criminal behavior across diversified life stories. What if making the decision to finally heal the trauma that threatens to sabotage us could actually be the strongest building block of our infrastructure for success? The recipe for success requires a careful evaluation of our own character, which brings us to letter G. Growing your character by adopting intentional core values and elevating your professionalism. I respect and admire the Rotary core value of service over self, and I humbly believe that that decree must be led by authenticity. I think you will agree that there is a constant flow of local and/or global catastrophe knocking on our collective doors, much of which is fueled by hate. I was determined to spread love, not hate, so I adopted a kindness initiative called the Triple Filter. Has anyone heard of it? Ooh, sharing new info. Love it. The goal with the Triple Filter is to stop the practice of gossiping by silently asking yourself 3 questions. Is it true? Is it kind? Is it necessary? If you cannot answer yes to all 3 questions, you would walk away, change the subject, or call the person out. Not only does the Triple Filter stop the practice of gossiping, it also taught me to be more gentle, empathetic, and unconditionally kind. If you take the time to listen to another person's story instead of judging a first impression, you will likely find you have more in common than you originally thought. Empathy is the tie that connects us. I believe that the neglect of developing intentional core values comes from a universal lack of self-care, which brings us to letter E, exercise self-care. On the screen here are a list of 5 self-care categories: mental, physical, emotional, spiritual, social, with examples of how I connect to each category and my own commitment to self-care. I also have a detailed self-care handout along with a bookmark for you to take home that includes all of the resources I mentioned today, and that's on the back table. The final letter of the TIGER acronym is R. Reinvent yourself often. I hinted at the importance of reinventing yourself today, and I truly appreciate the value of a fresh start and a new purpose. The pandemic allowed many of us, me included, to slow down and finally breathe into our fundamental passion and purpose while being quarantined in our homes. As the lockdown began, I was managing my children's online education and caring for my mother-in-law who was fighting breast cancer. I was not in our Domino stores very much. At first, I was discouraged because I loved being in the daily operations of our business. But then I realized the serendipitous opportunity I was being presented. The time at home allowed me to face my demons, heal my traumas, and write my book. And the honor of providing hope to other hurting souls with 11 life lessons in my book allowed me to begin a whole new career, and I've never been happier. Paying it forward is very much a part of my core value identity as a cognitive empath, and that allows me to thrive with my stay fierce commitment to bravery and passion. Connecting to my passion each day is also the reason I'm able to start and end my day with gratitude. In closing, it only takes one moment to claim your title as a survivor and no longer settle for going through the motions in life as a victim of trauma. What are you going to do today to become a fierce tiger and move past the thing that is holding you back? Thank you for listening. Oh, yes, if you all have questions, I know that your focus is children. And one thing I wanted to mention, I know there's a lot of controversy about millennials and the entitlement conversation. And one thing that I thought was very interesting in my research is that a lot of times individuals who have experienced childhood trauma end up having it show up as entitlement later in life. So that's where, this piece about facing the traumas, healing the traumas is so important for your professional career. So I thought that might be interesting since you guys support children and families in need. So any questions? Yes, Marilyn?
I hope as a millennial, I'm not entitled.
No, I'm sure you're not.
So I have done EDMR, and I know you talked about it as far as PTSD for military, but can you elaborate it more for childhood trauma, because it's used a lot, and that's why I entered in that.
I would love to talk about that with you. So basically, the way it helped me, because I guess my trauma started at age 18, so I was right there on the edge of childhood, and I feel like it allowed me to work through the negative feelings and negative thoughts that I was putting on myself as a result of a situation that was beyond my control. And so the systematic process of EMDR allowed me to kind of do a deep dive on each individual trauma. So you don't throw it all in a bucket. You're doing one at a time. And it really allowed me to kind of see the truth in it and rebrand the trauma as just part of my history and to be able to find the truth in it, not just be holding on to something that was diminishing my own confidence. Yes, sir. Next.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So, reinventing yourself. You know, Jerry told me to ask you, at 35 years old, he tried to reinvent himself, but now he's up in age. So how do we do that at that age?
Well, I think that I think that goes back to the personality tests, right?
Finish.
So if you take those two personality tests, it's very clear in the data what you enjoy on a day-to-day, on a weekly basis.
I know what I enjoy.
Okay, well, there you go. So even if you're retired, this doesn't have to be a career move. This could simply be how you volunteer, the charities that you connect to, anything like that. Like Kevin and I are very intentional about the charities that we connect to. We want to see the impacts, but we also have that connection, like Bob Ganoush mentioned with his 3-year-old daughter. We want to do things that we know that if our children were in that situation, that, you know, they would be getting the support.
Right. So last piece, I just want to say, you know, you talked about reinventing yourself. You kind of, in older age, you want to say that you said something like you feel like your entitlement. Can you talk a little bit more about the entitlement part? Because Jerry, well, it's always entitled. You know, he thinks it's up to him.
Well, I'll get personal with you guys here. So one of our daughters was struggling with entitlement in a particular situation, and I was getting really frustrated. And so for the benefit of my relationship with her, I did a lot of research on it. And I realized that some of the things that she had experienced early in her career or late in her teens had informed some of that behavior. And so I was able to become more empathetic to her and an ally with her and lead the way with my own therapeutic process. And now she's doing the same for herself. And so that's the empathy piece, you know, just realizing that all of us are going to probably deal with something and we're not sure how that's going to show up as far as our behavior or our character. But the sooner we can kind of address it and create a therapeutic process, the better we're going to show up in our personal and professional lives.
Thank you for your wonderful presentation. And I guess we all have trauma in our life, and we all have to confront it so that we control it and it doesn't control us. Is that essentially the takeaway from your remarks?
I mean, I agree with that sentiment. I think that, you know, there are a lot of tools that I mentioned today. And in addition, I do have my book back here that I'm selling that has 11 life lessons that kind of dive deeper into specific traumas that a lot of us have experienced that are a little bit more personal. And I just think that, you know, if we can talk to each other and be vulnerable in that space and share some of our experiences, you never know how that story is going to show up with someone else. So just that's what I said about demystifying the conversation. You know, there's such a stigma. We don't want to talk about mental health. And, you know, Kevin and I just heard a story the other day about, you know, a PTSD and military situation that seemed like it wasn't handled appropriately. So there's a lot of fear there. And I just think that the more we can talk about it, the more progress we can make in this space.
I can't resist. The 3 octaves began at the G below middle C.
Yes. Thank you for a blast from the past. I hadn't thought about that in a while.